We have a tremendous group of panelists led by our moderator, Donny Holaschutz, who is the partner of inodú. He's going to come up and he's going to bring up his panel with him. So for those of us in the revolution, what time is it? Micro time. I like that. Choke time.
Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate the introduction. So today we have, we'll get set up here. We have a great panel. Very excited to have this great group of folks with us today. So today's topic at hand is, there's definitely a lot of what we've been talking about today is there's a lot of change happening. And the change is happening and starting from the customer. There's a lot of introduction of distributed energy resources, and that is creating new opportunities. The customer is becoming more digital, has access to more data, and that change is going all the way through the value chain where all this data is being generated, and it's creating opportunities for different stakeholders along the value chain. So the topic today is grid digitalization. And basically, we have a Slido poll here, and I'd love for you guys to participate. And really wanted to get your perspective on whether, grid digitalization, it's happening, it's been happening. Is it a revolution that's taking place, or is it an evolution? So with that, I'll introduce our panelists. So here to my left, we have Jackie Sargent. She's the general manager of Austin Energy, the local utility here in Austin. And Jackie is very passionate about, she has a belief that she can drive change and really bring value through the customer by providing new innovative technologies and also being an environmental leader. Next to him, we have Mike Carlson. Mike Carlson has a ton of experience in industry. He's definitely no newbie to the industry. He's been around for a while. He was a CIO at a major utility, and he's also the president of Siemens Digital Grid North America. And they try to partner with utilities around the world to provide expertise and innovative technologies that create value through digitalization. So he's very knowledgeable about the technology side and how to provide that technology and services. Next to him, we have Patrick Lee. Patrick is the Vice President of Infrastructure and Technology of Sempra Infrastructure. And he now, he founded and now leads the Sempra investment into PXISC Energy Solutions. And they're working on very interesting advanced grid control technology. I got the opportunity to sit next to Patrick at lunch, and he was very excited to tell me about his advanced grid control technology. So it's great to have him here. And finally, we have at the end there somebody that is very important to Texas. He's the president and chief executive officer of ERCOT, which is the system operator. And Bill is really trying to lead ERCOT through change. And there's a change that's happening because of increasing network modeling complexity. There's load and intermittent resources. There's needs of visualization and getting better situational awareness. So before, I hope you guys continue to participate and also take the chance as you're participating in this poll to submit your questions so we can address those at the end. So I wanted to jump into the first question, and I wanted to get an idea from the different panelists, and I'll start with that with Jackie, and I wanted to see how is your organization involved in grid digitalization and the management of these distributed energy resources today?
Thank you. One of the things that we have going on right now is we have a strategic initiative that's focused on integration. So we have technologies that are out there. Some technologies have been around for a long time, but we're taking solar, we're taking batteries, and we're taking a new evolution of smart inverters, and we're looking at how can we integrate those into a functional system that enhances reliability of our operations and then lets us optimize those assets more completely. So if you think about it, rotating machinery has certain limitations and capabilities. And when you look at these technologies and you have a system that can integrate them, not only when the battery or the solar panels are producing power, can you do things like influence voltage and reactive power on your grid. These new smart inverters allow you to do that also when the battery's being charged. So it creates a new dynamic. So we're really excited about learning about these opportunities, understanding how they can enhance our system operations. We're doing that at a small scale, but hopefully someday we'll be able to do that at a larger scale, or we'll know how to integrate those throughout the system so that we have co-optimization.
Excellent. So with that, I'll skip you for a second. I'll go straight into Patrick because Patrick is working on these advanced control technologies. And so I'd like him to tell us a little bit about what your view on digitalization and how is your organization participating in that.
Okay. So I can tell you that Sempra is doing more than the status quo of our utility companies such as San Diego Gas Electric and now Encore and other South American utilities are investing in developing and testing smart grids, microgrid, and so on. And at the corp level, we are investing through technology funds to get a hold of technologies that are out there, right? So we're going beyond that. So we actually pull a team of experts together looking at power system control engineers as well as control system and even business people that have knowledge of human concept design and so on, to really look at removing the constraints that's in front of us, because we observe that most of the innovation occur within a set of constraints. For example, if there's market rule already existing, people are designing solutions around the market rule, as opposed to removing the constraints first and look at what does it take for an energy control system to operate a modern grid, and what is that technology? And so when we put this team of experts together, we realized that, hey, there is something transformational out there that already exists within the power grid that we can now combine a number of enabling technology to do what the military has done, to do what the network transportation company like Uber has been done, to say, hey, now they can adopt a GPS-based technology combining with other enabling technology to now optimize a set of resources that are very different to be able to get maximum utilization of the existing as well as new asset that you're adding. And so this new control technology that I'm pioneering is basically using existing GPS-based technology that was invented in the 1982 in Virginia, tech called single phaser. But when people first heard about that, they said, well, that's a transmission grid solution. That's a blackout prevention tool. But now we have taken this technology into a streaming control to allow you to use it behind the meter. But what it's able to enable you to do is that now we can deploy a microgrid in 2 weeks, okay? So that's never been heard of in the industry to say, I can do that. So we actually demonstrated that. Or we demonstrated in an island a 200 megawatt system where it takes today 7 regulating generator and 3 battery to balance the grid on a day-to-day basis. And now with this advanced GPS-based technology, we can use 1 of the 3 battery and 1 of 7 generator to do a better job to balancing the grid that's dynamic. To me, that's transformational. So now I think that the industry need to really wake up to think, if this is not a dream, you owe it to yourself to validate this and say, what can we take from this to change our business model? It doesn't matter whether you're a utility or an ISO or a vendor of supplying technology. I think everyone has an opportunity to take something like that forward. So I'll stop there.
Okay, well, excellent. And that'll transition me into Mike. Mike, you probably get to deal with large industrial clients that are dealing with digitalization, utilities around the world. So you have a broad perspective of what might be happening in different markets. How is your your group and your company addressing these challenges?
Yeah, first you have to start with the argument of people who say we've been digitalizing the grid for a long time. And that's accurate. And the question is, how is, similar to the poll, is it starting to revolutionize the grid? And it's all about, and I think Jackie mentioned this earlier, it's how did these things come together? And they come together both in a physical presentment and management of the grid, but they interact digitally, or they have the ability to interact digitally. So Siemens has been a long time foundation company of building devices. And those devices continue to be the core of the grid to operate it as well as to monitor it. So where we're going, if you look at whether you want to call it Digitalization 2.0 or the next frontier, it's how do you make use of that data and that capability that is existing in the devices. So IoT is another buzzword of digitalization, that Internet of Things, but it's really a great description of how you connect these devices. And those devices have to be connected both into, call it the central hub of the control grid, the operations center, if you will, but they also, to optimize their ability, they need to be connected to machine. So edge-based grid connectivity. So our focus is not only in enabling the data to get to the right decision-making, but then to visualize it and present it, because we still are a very human-centric grid management process industry, whether you're an industrial or utility. And then ultimately, what's the rules engine that can be applied to optimize the grid with all the new variables that are being presented to it. So as we go through that process, it's about automating and bringing the existing equipment to its next level of embedded capability.
Well, thanks for bringing that together, and you gave me a great segue to go into Bill. So Bill has to oversee this in Texas, and there's a lot of changes. Texas has integrated a ton of wind, there's distributed energy resources, there's a lot of information. What is ERCOT doing about it?
Well, I think my response in a lot of ways echoes those of the previous panelists, but I'll start this way. Every spring, I promise myself I'm not going to get sucked in by the NCAA tournament. Texas is my team, and we don't normally go that far, but every year I seem to, right? So I'm watching TV over the weekend. Charles Barkley's talking. I'm listening to Charles Barkley a lot over the last few weekends. And one of the other commentators says, you got these teams like Loyola, like these upstart underdogs. Why don't they can often get really far, but why don't they ever really win it all? And Barkley says, well, they're really good at the fundamentals, but the really good programs get the tall guys because there's not very many of them, so they go to the big programs. Just kind of like, well, yep, I think that about sums it up, right? What does that have to do with any of this? We got fundamentals, and then we got to get the tall guys. The fundamentals right now are a lot of what you hear, using the, as Mike said, the embedded capabilities of systems that are out there, of control systems, and of new technologies like synchrophasers in new ways, and taking the enormous amounts of useful data they take and turning that data into information that's actionable. And for us, the fundamentals are things that are maybe kind of boring to some people, but like with distributed energy resources, if a grid operator cannot see it, we cannot forecast it, we cannot put it into our network models, and if it's not in our network model, you have a grid operator who's trying to run a system that doesn't exist in reality. Because if those network models aren't accurate, we're not really operating the system we're supposed to be operating. So issues like registration, what has to register and what doesn't, and issues like network modeling and making sure those network models are not only robust, but are frequently, regularly updated. And then things like as simple as, we spent a lot of time at ERCOT last year on taxonomy. What? What do terms mean? There's 7 different ways to say load in the ERCOT protocols. And as you get more and more players involved in the situation, how do we define the terms so that they can go into the models and into the registration? So what are the tall guys? That's when you start taking the ability to use these systems that we have, the ability to use the synchrophasers, the ability to use the data that's available to us, and use it in the next generation network that's being built and developed as we operate this one. It's kind of like we said when we refreshed one of our major technology systems. It's like, doing brain surgery on the pilot while he's flying the plane. That's a lot of what it feels like, and yet have to do it in a very secure system that must also maintain extreme cybersecurity. So I think we're looking at, what are those next level things that we can be doing to fulfill the promise that the pilots Jackie talks about, that the other ideas people are bringing to the table can fit into a system that still works in the way everybody expects it, which is safely, reliably, and is there when they need it.
Well, excellent. That ties it together. Obviously, I hear a lot of need to integrate, use the data, provide insights, take action on that data, do pilots, understand, how to go forward. So I wanted to go back to the poll, if we can bring that up, if that's possible. But I also wanted to get the panel's opinion on whether you think we're in a revolution or we're on an evolution. I'll let you go first, Jackie. Maybe you'll be with the audience or against the audience.
Well, I'll talk about it from my own personal experience. When I started in the electric utility industry, going on 30 years now ago, I was in a position where I was an instrumentation and control engineer, and we would have pieces of equipment and they wouldn't work, and I would go out and troubleshoot. And I can remember standing in the control room of a specific piece of equipment and having memorized the control sequence. I knew what was supposed to happen when, and I would talk to the operator and say, okay, hit the start button. And it was kind of like, I felt like I was in an orchestra, and I would wait and listen. I knew this was supposed to pick up, then this, then this. And when something didn't pick up, I said, there it is. It's that agistat, change it out. To seeing the progression to going to analog systems, where we started getting some communication, and then taking those to distributed information systems and distributed control systems that provided us to have a look at real time what was happening, let us record information, let us get alarms on things, to the systems and things that we have in place today where we can predict problems before they ever occur. And so seeing that from that evolutionary perspective, and then taking that information to the next level, and as we try to integrate these things, and then find ways that we can better increase the reliability and functionality of the assets that we have, but the new technologies that are being developed and how we can bring those together for a better system.
Well, you're with most of the audience on being on an evolution, but actually we're talking a little about this backstage, and you brought up a really interesting point, Mike, and you were saying it really is about perspective here. Can you tell us a little bit about how your perspective might affect if you're in an evolution or a revolution, or what do you think is driving this?
So what we meant by perspective is if you look at the two sides of the equation, those who operate and manage the grid, those who utilize and consume the grid, I think you get two totally different opinions of what's happening, how fast it's happening. And you've got to remember, this is an industry that has been built on consistency, whether it's consistency of delivery, consistency of process, consistency for safety. And those individuals are being presented with totally new ways of doing things, new technologies, new capabilities. And one of the puns that the industry always has to deal with is, how does it know that it's got an outage? Well, people pick up the phone and call somebody. And I think from the perspective of the other side of the equation, the consumers, it's still that way. And if you go to the utilities who have implemented vast smart meter networks that are communicating thousands and millions of data points, how they've got to work their challenges are much different today than they were even 2 years ago. And so from that perspective, the outage agent who's on the call desk is seeing a revolution in what they've got to do. We demo our software and we love to put geospatial maps in front of the user, and it's amazing when we show, look, red flashing dots are a problem. we show it with 10, 15, 20 red flashing dots. You take a storm like Sandy that goes through an area, you have millions of flashing dots. You've got a user who's saying, what do I do with this? There are no dots, it's just all red. And yet you've got a consumer base that wonders if the utility knows what's going on. They call, they can't get through, they continue to call. So that user community and the people we talk to suggest that it's the same old thing. It's the same as it was last year, it's the same as it was last decade. It was the same when I grew up and started to pay my electric bill. So it's really hard to argue that there's a revolution in front of us or occurring, even though I'm glad to see the revolutionary supporters climbed up a little bit. But I think if you look in the future and you start doing things like integrating a consumer who's used to paying a bill based on how much they used, and now they've got the opportunity through blockchain technologies to sell into the market and get paid back, that's going to be revolutionary, without a doubt. But that's yet to come, and I think we've got to keep that in mind. We also have to keep in mind that until our customers see revolution, they're going to be hard-pressed to support it and help us pay for it.
So that'll go to a follow-on question. Obviously, there's areas where things are changing more rapidly than others. There's areas where there's existing systems and there's a transition. So I'd like to get the perspective from Bill and get an idea of, you see all this change, how are you preparing as an operator? You have a very important role. How are you preparing for all this change, all this generation of data, all this integration of distributed energy resources?
Well, we're preparing for what we see in the future, but there's a lot of things we've had to do already. For example, in ERCOT, we've got over 20,000 megawatts of wind on our system, by far the most wind power of any electric grid in the United States and most of the world. And so things as fundamental, like I was talking about before, fundamental issues like you used to have to forecast load. You needed to forecast how much you expected people to use when, to know how much to have on the system. You didn't forecast generation. We didn't forecast your resources. Now we got to forecast the resource because we better know what to expect on the system when it's driving. You know, we've seen 54% wind penetration one day last fall. 54% of the electricity provided in ERCOT was provided by wind. So you have to undertake new things that are done in very different ways. And you know, for example, as we've begun to do solar forecasting, the way you forecast solar is different from the way you forecast wind. We've discovered that the way that what you can count on from wind resources on the coast of Texas is very different from what you can expect from the wind resources in West Texas. You know, and a lot of this is empirical. A lot of it's as you go through using these systems, working with new resources, you're learning. And one of the reasons why I think we often want to take an evolutionary approach is to try some things and see how they go before we make everyone use them or make everyone stick with them. And so there's just, you know, one issue after another where we take the traditional tools of operating the grid but are having to apply entirely new ways of thinking to them to address the new issues.
Excellent. So a lot of this change is creating opportunities. It's also creating certain challenges in better operating. So I'll go to the next question, and I'll go to Patrick. And you know, Patrick, you were speaking about, you know, a specific technology whenever you were talking about control of the grid. Can you tell me a little bit about, you know, what you think is driving change essentially in the space, and what are you, as you're observing the opportunities, where do you see some of the most interesting trends shaping this space?
Okay, so I think oftentimes, you know, most CEO talks about the 3 Ds, right? They talk about decarbonization, you talk about decentralization, right, which popular trends, right? And then today we talk about digitization, right, the 3rd D, right? But if you look at the 3 Ds, 2 of them are really driven by global trends, right? When you have adoption of renewable that drive intermittency issue that Bill has to deal with, and then The second trend, decentralization, created a large amount of distributed energy resources. Also, bill has to deal with that. And then, of course, the industry has to sell technology to support that, and the utility has to deal with that, right? So this really created significant combined challenges for the industry when you add those two together, right? You have now intermittency issue and coordination problem to deal with. So if you think about today to say, hey, what is the opportunity from an evolutionary standpoint? Well, we have heard from other panelists to say, hey, if you have incremental innovation that now a company that don't even own asset can provide grid services, it changes the business model. So now when we're driving a brand new transformation technology that's vector-based, GPS-based, the business model change is going to be really significant. And you think about that now, if this technology can address intermittency and coordination problem because it's GPS time synchronized to help bills to operate the grid better, it's a whole new world, right? To me, that's revolutionary.
Right. So, Jackie, I like to go to you with your perspective. You work with, your utility, and you have a lot of residential customers that they rely on electricity a lot more than they used to. They don't notice it when it's really being supplied, but when it's gone, they really care about why they're not able to use their apps, their computers, that sort of stuff. So what do you think is really driving change from your customers' perspective, and what trends are you seeing with your customers in Austin Energy?
I would say what's changing is we used to have exceptional customer service and we focused on that. Now we're talking about the customer experience, and that's a different paradigm. And I think if you're not aware of that and attuned to that all of a sudden you're not going to be meeting their expectations anymore because they've shifted. And our customers, we know that they want to have choice, we know that they want to have control, and we know that they want to know if their power's out, when it's going to come back on. They have smart devices or smartphones, and so we've been working on deploying two-way outage communication. We got that up and running just before Harvey hit last year. And for us, not only do we know that they're out of power so they don't have to call us, we can then get enough information that we can get down to a smaller scale of outage, and we can then give them information on when they can expect to have their power restored. And that's very important for us. So it's about this holistic approach to creating this new customer experience and helping them to be able to use our product more efficiently and more wisely.
Excellent. So with these new opportunities being created in the customer side, and to take advantage of all the data that's being generated, what are some of the capabilities that you're creating within your organizations to cope with the challenges that are taking place? I don't know if you would like to tell us a little bit about that, Mike.
Yeah, I think if you look at what the opportunities or the necessity, one of the two, are presenting, it's requiring not only the industry from a technology provider, but as Bill referenced, the consumer, how do they look at it differently and how do they prepare? So, our industry used to hire power engineers and software engineers. That was the crux of what we needed. Now we're hiring data scientists, and we're hiring human factors professionals, and we're hiring process design people. Not to say that they all weren't there, but they were very much overshadowed by the traditional power engineer and the software engineer. So those are some of the examples that we're having to change our approach to the market. Then if you look at what it is we're designing, we're also, and I think Jackie mentioned this backstage, how do we make sure what we build, and as much as Siemens would love to be your total end-to-end solution operator, how do we make sure what we build interacts with the rest of the industry? And this industry, as I said before, it's not prone to change. It doesn't like to interject risk into the model. And so everybody's got their standards, and as much ubiquity that exists within the product we deliver, it's the same. It is the same here. You go to Europe, it's a 50 hertz system rather than a 60, but it's still a kilowatt of energy that comes through a wire. The different approaches that we use to deliver it are the reason that these utility operators are concerned about the investments they make. How do they invest today in something that's going to work tomorrow? And so the other factor that we're dealing with is the agility of our solution design. How does it continue to evolve? How do we avoid having to call up Bill and saying, we've got a new upgrade in your future, Bill, and it's, you know, scary. How do we make sure that continues? Or vice versa, Bill calling me and saying, Mike, we just went down this path with distributed energy. We need this out of you. So that agility in design and architecture and thinking, arguably that's a new skill for this industry to start to consider as well. So all those being factored into what are the technologies being built at the device machine level, but also at the software and intelligence level that go along with it.
Right. So, Bill, how is ERCOT preparing for this in terms of the capabilities that it's building? Being the operator, having that traditional role along, you know, the life of operation of the system.
Well, maintaining, you know, those traditional things that we're asked to do, so that we maintain reliability at the standard everyone expects, and we're managing a system under the construct of the Texas market that we've been operating under now for around 20 years. But at the same time, you have to be looking ahead. And, you know, for us, for example, distributed energy resources, microgrids, you know, there's a couple of issues for us. One is seeing it, having some level of aggregation so that grid operators can know what's out there, what to expect from their system, as I referenced earlier, and get it modeled appropriately. But then also market questions. How do we get an appropriate market signal to the distributed energy resources that are out there to turn on at the right time and in the right place? I mean, we hear it, and we also hear from distribution providers that a reciprocating engine or a diesel or a gas engine may decide it's time to start up on the distribution system, maybe at exactly the wrong place and time, and actually cause more trouble when it thought it was going to, provide service to the grid and get a price. So, addressing both market and technology issues simultaneously, and making sure that we don't lose track of what we need to be managing to see all this, because one of the reasons why utilities are often one of the first things taken over in a revolution is, along with the radio stations and means of communication. If they don't work well, your revolution's screwed. It's not going to go well for you if those fundamental basic services don't work. And as others have referenced, a lot of customers are getting more sophisticated. We've seen in Texas with retail choice, people making decisions in a lot of our market that people in a lot of markets have never had to make about, who's going to be my retail electric provider. So there's increased sophistication, but a lot of consumers, they want it to work like it's always worked, and they want to pay a reasonable price. And if the things we do in service of our cool new stuff we want to do cause significant dislocations for them, we're the ones in trouble, because there are a lot of people in a lot of state capitals and federal agencies who still care quite a bit about how it all goes. So we've got to maintain, the fundamental values while we keep thinking ahead.
Great. So I'm soon going to open it up for questions in the audience. But before I do that, I like to go one at a time. And really, what I like you to tell us is what you think is the most important thing we should be watching out for in digitalization and distributed energy resources in the next 5 to 10 years. I'll go ahead and get started with Patrick.
Okay. So you look at the industry, what's happening, and you see in utility company where your throughput has been reducing over the years, just because you have now distributed resources being deployed, right? And the next thing with energy storage, we also will see a peak reduction that you're already seeing it from an ISO perspective in utility. So if you think about an industry, you're being disrupted with throughput as well as your peak management, a lot of your asset system. So you think about this to say, well,
the business model has to change, has to transform. But before you can get to changing a business model, you have to look at the foundational change in technology that we talked about earlier on. Is it really evolution, type of incremental innovation, or is it a transformational? So once you can catch on to say, hey, these are the technology that we're going to rely on, and it's going to drive a new business model, then utility can transition to where the new world needs to be, right? So I think those are really important things to think through as an industry. It's a big machine, and it changes very slowly. Even when you throw in new technology to it, they're going to coexist, whether it's revolutionary or evolutionary. They all combine and work together, based on economics and competition. And that's what I love about sort of the coexistence of many technology that actually moved the whole electric sector forward. So I think the thought that I want to leave with you is to think through, to say, what is the business model that you need to drive to really transition this industry?
I'll go to you, Mike. What do you think is that thing we should be watching out for?
I think whether you're a grid operator or a grid consumer, it's optionality. You're going to see optionality continue to increase. Distributed energy is a great example. And it's not just optionality of how I consume power, but how it gets generated and how I share it. So the sharing or selling or buying, however you want to look at it, that optionality, that's going to be much more available. It wasn't too long ago that the only place you got power was from the utility.
Right.
Now you look at, you can be self-generating, you can be self-sustaining, and as storage technologies become more and more prevalent, you could be, self-independent if you were of that. And that's going to create new opportunities, but also a lot of new challenges to manage all that variability that's going to be, coming into the industry over the next 5 to 10 years.
Jackie, how about you? How do you see it with Austin Energy and your customers?
Well, I think it's really exciting right now as we have this pilot project out there to look at the integration of these technologies, and we have the learning that takes place from that, and we have the data that becomes available. We know what works best here or what works best in this situation, how we can then take that into an optimization. But then also the important thing is going to be how do we get the pricing signals for that? Where's the true value? How do we take this system, we've been able to optimize it, and then how do we put a value on the value proposition that it brings to the table? And so it's going to have to be an integrated project and a development of how that market comes up with those pricing signals that helps us as utilities to build those business cases to say, this is the thing that's going to bring the biggest value, this is what we're going to carry forward. And then the evolution as the technology continues to improve with smart inverters and all of that, and as prices come down. So all of those things will play together. It's a great time to be in the electric utility industry, and I'm so proud to be with Austin Energy.
Excellent. So we'll close it out with that question with the system operator. What are you looking out for in the next, with all the information that you have, the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, to echo Jackie's last comment, the greatest thing about being in the industry right now is you have to sit and think about it. There are issues about the types of resources we have on our systems and how we're integrating them that are fundamental to doing our job well. There's questions about energy efficiency and load management that are changing all the time and adding new dimensions to what we can do on our systems. Market issues surrounding all of those, as well as reliability and operational issues. But I'm going to choose this one. And I'll reference, I tell people all the time, two very primary things I have to do at ERCOT. One is make market and grid information available as transparently and as rapidly as possible to both market entities who need it to do their business and to other operators who need it to manage their systems effectively. The second key job I have is to keep a lot of information secret. To prevent the wrong information about the grid or the wrong market information that's market sensitive, at least for some periods of time, safe and secure. And I think that's, kind of writ large, we have to figure out good user interfaces, and we face this with our market participants. My 10-year-old knows that if you go to a website and the user interface is not modern, they must be dumb, or worse, old. You sure don't want to play there, right? You can't have that. I mean, that's a new indicator of who you are, right? So maintaining modern interfaces, creating ways that the information that's supposed to be transparent is available through APIs that work effectively and not through transfers of Excel spreadsheets back and forth. Doing that stuff in the most modern way possible, simultaneously protecting those information assets as well as the physical assets that they represent from cyber attack, from physical attack, and we are always under attack. I mean, I think it goes without saying at this point, not only the electric industry, but people get very worried when they hear that about the electric industry. And we have a security responsibility, and that's another one of those things, as I mentioned before, that if it goes wrong in a very bad way because someone did not do their job appropriately, we're gonna hear about it. And it could stall the progress of a lot of the cool stuff that we'd all like to be doing in a very exciting industry.
Excellent. So there's a tension there. So I like to go and ask Aaron for any questions from the audience to get the audience involved.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of questions come in, but I want to ask one, since Mike mentioned earlier, about the different types of people you've been hiring. So this question sort of sounds like it comes from a skeptic. It says, why would the most talented data scientists, analysts, and software developers want to focus their careers on utilities and the grid? Where's the sizzle?
Is that Aaron up there? What's out there? The headset on?
Let me give you one example. We've been doing a lot of work at the universities, both in enabling their capabilities, but also their education. And I've interacted with universities on the utility perspective, the industry, for over 10 years. And the amount of interest and recognition of what these individuals, these new generation of students see in the need and the ability to impact society from energy is dramatic. If you want a revolution, I would say that's as close to what I've seen. So just 2 weeks ago, met with 10 graduate students at Case Western University in Cleveland. Amazing perspective on what they want to do and why they feel that this industry is the way to do it. So I can't give you the questionnaire, the why, but I'm just excited that it's there, and it is real from my perspective.
Excellent. Aaron, do we have another one that we can take? We have about a minute to go.
Yeah, we do. So what do you guys think the time frame for digitalization will be to lead to new revenue streams that are material to the finances of the utility? Is it 5, 10, 20 years, or never?
I made a mistake 15 years ago of making an estimate that's been wrong every year, so I'm not going there.
Does anybody want to take a shot?
Yeah, I think I want to go back to my earlier point about, when you can transition from a magnitude-based sensor system to a GPS-based sensor system, to me, is transformational for the electric sector. And the solution that I talk about is not really just applicable for control system, from asset management, because now you have a new pool of information coming at you, high resolution, high speed. It would transform this industry going forward, not just on the CapEx and OpEx, but going forward on how do you deploy a better control technology, better information sensor system that can create new opportunity for us. How do we transform from here and move forward and maybe reduce our carbon footprint to a large degree, and how quick we can get there? You need some technology like that. And I think we have an opportunity to take advantage of what we have now created to take it forward.
Well, and I'd just add, Patrick, don't sleep on the stuff we've already done. It's not super sizzle sexy, but the deployment of smart grid, of smart meters in Texas, the number of truck rolls that saved, the number of just operating costs that impact that's had for utilities is not nothing. It's not a new revenue stream, but it certainly is changing the revenue picture, the personnel picture. The things that are happening out there already are making significant business changes for the utilities. Some positive, some negative, but they're already happening, I think.
And just in closing on that, I would say that it's going to depend on how rapidly the costs come down, because we do know that affordability is key for all of our customers and making sure that we're managing that. So how rapid will those technology advances drive down the costs and drive the costs out of those things so that we can bring them online quicker? That's going to be our biggest challenge, and that's going to be the biggest thing that creates the breakthrough, is how do we get them to be cost effective, more timely?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Jackie. I think if you think about today, right, we continue to use the current technology that we have, incrementally improve it. We'll continue to build the inefficiency that we have built the last 150 years. If you cannot get to fundamentally increasing the value of the asset that you already installed, plus the asset that you're adding, if you only focus on adding new resources and use the best of it, you will have a challenge, right? So you think about the balance of what resources has to be controlled by the utility, by the ISO, versus what should be controlled by the market. Well, they need to coexist, because when you have a very dynamic grid that changes all the time, the utility and the grid operator has to have some control to stabilize the grid in order to leverage the market-based technology. So that has to be finding its balance based on the technology that we have today. So if you can now, using new technology, get to the fundamental value of the asset that we have already collectively exists in our electric grid, when you drive the inefficiency out of that, now is your choice to determine how much win-win do you want between the shareholder and the customer and anybody else work in between to facilitate that transition. That's where the value is at.
Well, we're out of time, so I wanted to thank our panel. Thank you for such great comments and such great discussion, and also thank everybody in the audience for participating with great questions and participating in the poll. So I think we know that here we have a bunch of people that think more on the evolution side rather than on the revolution side.
Okay. Thanks, Donny.